Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning, and today we're talking about saying no. So, a lot of my clients struggle with saying no to requests, to demands, to things that get asked of them at work. And I thought maybe you would be similar. And so, it would be worth doing a podcast episode all about saying no, why we struggle with it, how we struggle with it, and what you can do if you're struggling with it. So I had a situation recently where an organisation asked for my help with something and kind of wondered if I was really the right person for them to speak to, but I said, yeah, okay. And they booked a time in my diary. And the time came, I was waiting on the call and they didn't show up. About 20 minutes into that time, they messaged to say they were rearranging. At this point, I was like, I'm doing you a favour anyway. And now you've just messaged me 20 minutes in to assume that you can just rearrange and put more time in my diary. And at that point, I was thinking, no way. But I didn't say it. I did not message them back and be like, no, please do not rearrange. Instead of saying no, I left it. So they did put more time in my diary and I thought, do you know what? It's just done now. Instead of declining it, again, I could have said no, could have declined it, but I didn't. I allowed it. So I get on the call and guess what? They didn't show up and they haven't emailed me to explain. And that made me think, do you know what? There were multiple moments in there where I could and should, if I was sticking to my guns, have said no, but I didn't. And that made me realize this thing that we all contend with, saying no, is an issue for me, like it might be an issue for you. I noticed recently when I was with some kids that little ones, very little ones, do not struggle with saying no at all. In fact, they're like, no, 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 no. They know exactly what they want to say yes to, and they know exactly what they want to say no to. And probably for most of us, that shifts and changes as we get older. Probably part of that is to do with becoming an adult. But part of it is also to do with how we're socialized. So we live in society, right? For most of us, we live with people, we live around people, we've got colleagues, we've got communities. And part of the way that we all manage that is through reciprocity, is through give and take. I help you, you help me. That's how things work. That's how we get things done. And part of that involves saying yes to things and yes to people. But what happens when is something that you hardly ever do, even when you actually really want to say no? Saying yes becomes almost such a reflex action, such a habituated pattern that it may be even out of your mouth before you've even thought about or considered whether you can actually meet this request, whether you actually want to, whether it's possible with the demands that you already have on your time, whether you're even the best person to do this thing. If you've been socialized as a woman, then you may have some added difficulty because being socialized as a woman generally means being socialized to be agreeable, to be nice, to be helpful, to be kind. And all of those things mean saying yes. And all of those things probably mean saying yes, even when you really don't want to do something, even when you really want to say no. So if you struggle with saying no, and you find yourself saying yes, even when you're thinking, I really didn't want to say yes to that. I don't know why I said yes to that. Don't internalize it and make this a personal problem or a personal failing. One, generally, we've all been kind of socialized to be people who support one another and say yes to things. And, there's a certain amount of good in that in society. But two, you may have been socialized as somebody who should be kind and should be agreeable and should be nice. And all of those things really mean saying yes, even to things you don't want to do. And this saying no thing could cover a whole spectrum, right? You could be saying yes because you fear for your safety or you fear physical violence. In that scenario, you probably are likely to say yes. Or maybe your scenarios is it's not really that, but maybe it's kind of one down from that where you fear there's negative repercussions or negative repercussions are at least possible if you say no. And those negative repercussions might be a few different things. It might be a negative repercussion for your career or a perceived, should we say, negative repercussion for your career. It might mean somebody might not like you or you perceive that somebody might not like you. Again, part of the way that we're socialized, and especially women, they're taught to think that this is a really big deal. Like, people have to like me. This is important. A negative repercussion might be that somebody's going to be mad at you or disappointed with you. So somebody else is going to have a feeling about the fact that you say no. Or you might just think somebody is going to judge you in a certain way. They're going to judge you as being inefficient or unable to do your job well. And one down from fear of negative repercussion is actually just not even considering that you can say no. Sometimes I will coach on this issue and somebody will say, it wasn't even an awareness in my mind that it was possible for me to say no. And who knows how people have been raised? You may have been raised where you always had to say yes, but where no really wasn't an option. Maybe you've been in a relationship where no really wasn't an option. Maybe you've been in a workplace where no really wasn't an option. All of that may have kind of contributed to this habituated pattern running in your unconscious, which might be kind of outside of your view of things at the time, which says you can't say no to people. That's not allowed. That's not okay. That's bad, right? It could be some version of that. There may be no repercussion in a scenario if you say no. That's possible. It's also possible that there may be a repercussion. And in this episode, I'm not talking about those instances where you are maybe fearing physical violence or you're fearing for your safety. We're really focusing here on those situations that really are a step down, a step away from that, and are more in the maybe there'll be a negative repercussion on me. Maybe they'll think about me differently. Maybe they won't like me. Maybe they'll, get some ideas about me. And maybe I never even considered that I could say no. Maybe no one's ever role modeled or taught me that you can say no when there's a request that you don't want to say yes to. Maybe you've never actually really seen anybody do that. You never had the opportunity to learn. And I think the great thing is that you can learn. And even if your socialization says you should not do this, you can decide that you will. You can change something. You may first have to notice what loops you've got running in your unconscious programming, which are creating this pattern of you always saying yes. Like I'm always saying on this podcast recently, this is to help you kind of lift the lid a little and get under your own hood and see, when I'm always saying yes to things and I don't want to, what might be going on there? Am I thinking that somebody's going to think that I can't handle things? Am I thinking that they won't like me and I want them to like me? Am I thinking that they might judge me as someone who's selfish or lazy? Without judgment, just what chimes with you? Why might you be saying yes when actually you want to say no? And it might be different in different circumstances. So it might be that at work you're great at saying no, but for family things, you're always saying yes. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you feel really comfortable saying no to a request that your partner makes, let's say. Oh, do you want to go and see this thing at the theatre? You're like, nah, don't fancy it. Maybe you find that really easy, but maybe when your boss asks you whether you want to contribute on a certain project and you really don't, because you don't have the capacity and you're not the best person, you find yourself saying yes. I'll bet you that there is at least one scenario in your life where you do find it okay to say no, like it doesn't cause you any issue. It would be useful for you to think about what that scenario is and contrast it with the one where you're currently struggling. And it may be that you have to look somewhere really benign, like at the restaurant where they come over with a huge pepper mill and they're like, would you like black pepper? And you actually really don't want any black pepper. That you say, no, thanks. And you don't feel uncomfortable. You don't feel bad about that at all. It feels fine. So, where are you already able to just say no and you don't have any issue with it at all? If you have somewhere like that, if you have something like that, it is great to fish it out of your mind because you want to contrast that with the work project that you just didn't seem to be able to say no to, even though you wanted to. What's the difference? Think about that. And what that says to us, that example, is that if there is somewhere in your life or a situation where it's actually all right for you to say no and you feel fine about it, that means the scenarios where you're currently struggling to say no, you've probably got some different thoughts about. And those thoughts are often something like, I just didn't know that I could say no, didn't know that was a thing that people did and that it was okay thing to do. Or it's, oh, well, maybe it would have a negative repercussion on me or my career. Maybe it's somebody's going to make a judgment about me and who I am and how I am. And I don't like that. And just build those thoughts out a little bit. Be like, okay, so I'm thinking I can't say no because it's going to have a negative repercussion on my career. All right. Is that true? If I say no to this thing, is it likely that it will have a negative repercussion on my career? Find out what the answer is. And maybe you make a decision based on that. Let's say your thought is something like, I don't want somebody not to like me. And if I say no, they might not like me. Well, again, is that true? Would they or might they dislike you if you say no? It's possible. But some of the time you'll think, actually, no, I don't think they will dislike me. And for that, does everybody need to like you? Do you need to be everything to everyone to make sure that everybody likes you all the time? And like, where does that end up? If you have to make sure everybody likes you constantly, you're going to be saying yes to all kinds of things that you really don't want to be. And you may have done, all of us have done, in fact. And you might want to flip it around as well and say, is it actually you who doesn't like you when you say no? So have you got some kind of negative judgment about who say, no, actually, I am not going to do that or I don't want to do that? Are you like, oh, just be aware of that. And no surprise if you do, because we live in a particular society where we're taught rules or ideas and they end up in our head and then we end up judging people because of them. We may also be judging ourselves. And just be aware that women pay a higher penalty in the likability stakes. So this one's even trickier if you're a woman. May also be tricky if you're a man. Another thought that I think sometimes people bring is, if I don't do it, nobody will. That's one I've coached on quite a few times. And, that may be true in certain scenarios, but it may not be. So if you're one of those people that kind of just jumps in and says yes because no one else is doing and it's embarrassing or it's uncomfortable, you may be thinking, well, if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. So I have to say yes. Maybe you like your reasons for saying yes. Maybe you really want this thing to be done and you consider it to be really important and you feel it's really a worthy and a good use of your time. But maybe sometimes you don't quite think that. And if you felt more comfortable, or at least if you were okay with being uncomfortable, you'd be saying no. Brings me to my next point, which is sometimes we want to wait till we feel really comfortable and saying no feels fine and we feel confident saying no. But in my experience, that's not really the way that it goes. You can't wait and then suddenly just one day feel comfortable or confident saying no. So let's say you're aiming to start saying no to requests that you really want to say no to. I think you have to accept that you're probably going to feel uncomfortable in the beginning. And that's because you've been doing something really different for a long time. You've been saying yes for years. So if you start changing something, if you start trying to say no, you may have a reaction to that. And that reaction may be very uncomfortable. How uncomfortable are you willing to be? In the cringe stakes, in the discomfort stakes, decide ahead of time. Are you like, I am willing for this to be a 5 out of 5, squirming in my seat. I'm so uncomfortable. This is like, I cannot force these words out of my mouth. Are you willing to be that uncomfortable? Because you might actually have to be in the beginning. Then you might have to find out what actually happens when I go to 5 out of 5 discomfort and I actually do this thing and I actually say no. What actually happens afterwards? Because it may be that not much happens. You might be like, okay, I did it and nothing that bad happened. So potentially, maybe I could do it again. Maybe I could try it again and just see it as a process. Remember, we said the socialization you've had, the habits that you formed because of that socialization can make it really, really difficult. Therefore, it's probably going to be really, really uncomfortable when you get started exercising your no muscle. And remember, there's always something or someone that you are saying no to when you say yes. You might be saying no to that other thing that you could really be doing to forward your career. That's actually really important to you. Or you might be saying no to having more free time with your family that you actually really want. You may be just saying no to yourself when you're saying yes to somebody else. And it's good to notice that because what your brain's going to show you is all of the potential negative repercussions if you say no. But there's actually possibly some negative repercussions when you're always saying yes. You might want to see what they are so you can kind of balance them on the scale too. And finally, a challenge for you, if you choose to accept it. I'm going to challenge you before next week's podcast episode. Could you say no to one thing that you really don't want to do between now and next week? And think about, let's say you managed to do that. And next week's podcast episode, you're like, did it, did the challenge, said no to something. It was really uncomfortable, but I did it. Imagine if you then say no to something else the week after. And the week after and the week after that. Forward 1 year in time. So you've said no now 52 times to 52 different requests once a week, all year. Do you think you'll still feel as uncomfortable saying no as you do now? It's good to recognize because your answer might have been, no, I think I'll probably start to find it a little easier. Great. And if you said, no, I think I'll still find it very, very painful, then that's your sign to just decide how uncomfortable are you willing to feel in order to spend more time doing the things you want to do and saying yes to the things you do want to say yes to. And how uncomfortable are you willing to feel to potentially get that gender socialization out of your brain? If you've got a kid and you think about them growing into an adult, or if you just know a kid and you think about them growing into an adult, do you want them to be able to say no when it's something that they really don't want to do? Or do you want them to always have to say yes, even when really for them it's a no? And if not, why not? And if you want them to live in a certain way, you probably want you to live in a certain way too. So go forth and tell everyone to go fuck themselves. Not really. Just say no occasionally if that is what you want to do. I hope this podcast has given you a bit of food for thought. I hope it might have started to get some cogs turning and it might help a little with you saying no when you mean. If you want to come and work with me, if you'd like to feel more confident at work or you'd like to say no more easily, then I have spots available for one-on-one coaching. That is private coaching where we will sit down together for a period of time. We will look at your challenges and I will help you to overcome them. We also have the Members Club, which is for female professionals. And the Members Club is a place where we will do the background work, which helps you to feel more confident. So all of the stuff that we do here on this podcast, helping you to recognize and eliminate those habits, those patterns, those loops that are running in the background, which are eroding your confidence and making your life more difficult. I'm going to help you to spot and stop those so you can feel better at work. And we do that through training, group coaching, and through modules and teaching, which are in your learning library. You also have a private podcast. You can join us for a quarter or for a year, and you're very welcome to come and try us out. You'll have a warm welcome. All right. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.